Convincing often begins with the self. When we try to convince, we tend to focus on our own point of view, our own reasoning, but our own need to be understood. The spotlight naturally shifts toward what we believe is correct, important, or urgent. It becomes a performance of justification, where the goal is to prove ourselves right, rather than create space for the other person to explore what's possible. The result is a conversation that may be technically sound, but emotionally flat. Inspiration starts from a different place. It's not about proving yourself. It's about serving others. When you inspire, you focus on the hopes, fears, and dreams of the person in front of you. You enter their world instead of asking them to enter yours. The conversation changes shape, from one-way persuasion into a shared journey where they feel seen and valued. Inspiration invites them to move, not because they have to, but because they want to. When we convince, we lean heavily on facts, data, and explanations. These tools are useful, but they only reach the conscious mind, the part that rationalizes decisions. Inspiration reaches deeper. It taps into identity, belonging, and purpose. People rarely take lasting action because of a spreadsheet. They take lasting action because the story resonates with who they believe they are or who they want to become. Convincing often assumes resistance. You enter the exchange ready to push against a wall, to meet an opposing force. This stance can unintentionally create more resistance as people instinctively defend their autonomy. Inspiration, however, assumes openness. It starts with the belief that within the other person is a readiness to grow. All you have to do is help them find it. Inspiration is not about volume or dominance. It's about clarity and alignment. You don't need to talk over someone to inspire them. You need to speak to the part of them that already cares. When people feel that you understand their needs and values, they lean in. They open up. They become willing participants in the change rather than reluctant passengers. When we try to convince, our language often contains the word I think, I know, I believe. This centers the conversation on our own authority. When we inspire, the language shifts to you and we. It moves the conversation from a lecture to a partnership. And partnerships are where lasting influence lives. The irony is that convincing can often feel like a short-term win, but a long-term loss. Even if someone nods in agreement, their heart may not be with you. They may comply without truly committing. Inspiration may take longer to ignite, but when it does, it burns brighter and longer because it's fueled by their own choice, not your insistence. In the end, convincing is about transferring information, but inspiration is about transferring belief. Information fills the mind. Belief moves the soul. And when the soul moves, action follows, not because it was forced, but because it was chosen. Do you want me to now keep this same tone and expand the second keynote? People don't change because of logic alone into another 8-paragraph section. Logic is powerful, but it is rarely the spark that ignites real transformation. People are not machines processing input into output. They are emotional beings who carry memories, experiences, and feelings that shape how they see the world. When change is presented only through logical reasoning, it may register in the mind, but it doesn't necessarily touch the heart. Without that emotional connection, the idea remains an abstract possibility instead of a lived reality. We like to believe that if we simply present enough facts, people will see the truth and act accordingly. Yet history and human behavior prove otherwise. People will often reject overwhelming evidence if it threatens their sense of identity or security. This is not because they are irrational, but because human beings prioritize emotional safety over intellectual agreement. Change that feels unsafe emotionally will always meet resistance, no matter how airtight the argument is. Emotions act as the gatekeepers to belief. Before someone embraces a new way of thinking, they must feel understood, respected, and valued. These feelings create the trust required for them to even consider your perspective. Without trust, logic becomes just another voice among the noise. And they can easily be ignored or dismissed. Consider the role of stories. A single personal narrative can shift perspectives more than 1,000 statistics. Stories bypass the defenses of the rational brain and connect directly to empathy. When someone sees themselves in a story, it bridges the gap between your points and my reality. The facts may give them reasons, but the story gives them permission. Change also depends on timing. Even the most compelling logic can fall flat if the person isn't emotionally ready to hear it. We cannot force readiness through arguments. We can only nurture it through patience, presence, and consistent alignment between our words and actions. Logic waits for the right moment. Emotion helps create it. Logic may answer the question of what or a how, but emotion answers the question why. Without a clear and resonant why, people often see no personal reason to change. A new process, habit, or belief must connect to something they care about. Their sense of meaning, belonging, or self-respect. Otherwise, it remains an intellectual exercise with no compelling pull. Now, even in high-stakes situations where facts are urgent and undeniable, emotion still plays the deciding role. A patient may know the medical risks of ignoring their health, yet it's often the birth of a grandchild, the desire to walk a daughter down the aisle, or the fear of missing life's milestones that drives them to act. The logic explains the risk. The emotion creates the will. The most influential changemakers understand that logic and emotion are partners, not rivals. They don't abandon facts, but they weave them into a narrative that stirs the heart. In doing so, they transform cold information into a living vision, one that people can feel, and therefore, one they can follow. Selling relies on telling. It's the act of explaining why something matters, why it works, or why it's worth attention. The challenge is that telling often triggers skepticism. The more you insist something is valuable, the more people may question whether you're exaggerating. When you show instead of sell, you bypass that resistance. You let the reality of your actions, results, and consistency speak for themselves, allowing others to draw their own conclusions. Showing builds credibility because it's rooted in evidence that can be seen, felt, or experienced. Words can be doubted, but a lived example is harder to dismiss. When people witness something in action, a product solving a real problem, a leader making decisions aligned with their values, a team embodying the culture they claim to have, they can evaluate it without relying solely on your promises. Selling focuses on convincing someone in the moment, while showing creates a lasting impression over time. A well-crafted pitch may catch attention for an hour, but a consistent demonstration of value builds trust that compounds. People may forget what you said to them, but they remember how you made them feel when they saw proof with their own eyes. When you show, you invite curiosity. Instead of overwhelming people with explanations, you create space for them to ask questions. This flips the dynamic. They are no longer passive listeners, but active participants in discovering the value for themselves. That shift from push to pull transforms the interaction from a transaction into a relationship. Showing also means embodying the principles you advocate. If you talk about integrity, you model honesty in your smallest decisions. If you promote teamwork, you visibly collaborate and celebrate others' contributions. People trust what they see more than what they hear. And when your behavior matches your message, belief naturally follows. In many cases, showing requires patience. Selling aims for immediate agreement, but showing plays the long game. It trusts that consistent alignment between what you claim, what you do, will eventually draw people in. This patience not only builds credibility, but also filters out those who are not truly aligned with your values or vision. Showing creates stories without you having to tell them. Amabu? When people experience something remarkable, they share it with others. That kind of organic storytelling carries far more weight than any self-authored pitch because it's rooted in genuine personal experience. Your role becomes less about persuading and more about creating moments worth talking about. Ultimately, showing is about allowing the truth of your work, your values, or your product to stand on its own. It's about trusting that real impact doesn't need to be oversold. When people witness something real, their belief grows not because you asked for it, but because they saw enough to choose it themselves. Belief is rarely the result of a lecture. You can teach someone facts, processes, and theories, but belief is something deeper. It's an internal conviction that can't simply be installed through instruction. People adopt beliefs when they witness them lived out authentically, when they feel the energy and conviction behind them, and when they experience them in a way that resonates with their own values and identity. Belief spreads through presence more than persuasion. When you stand firmly in your convictions and consistently act in alignment with them, people can sense it. They may not immediately adopt your perspective, but they notice the integrity between your words and actions. Over time, that observation builds trust, and trust is the soil where belief can grow. Teaching focuses on transferring knowledge. Catching happens through immersion. Just like someone might learn a language faster by living in a place where it's spoken, people absorb belief when they are surrounded by it. The environment, the behavior of those within it, and the emotional tone create an unspoken influence that shapes what feels true and possible. When belief is lived, it becomes contagious. People naturally want to be part of something that feels real, consistent, and meaningful. They aren't drawn just to the idea itself, but to the sense of clarity and purpose they see in those who hold it. In this way, belief becomes less about convincing others of a point and more about embodying a way of being that attracts alignment. Belief that is forced through instruction can feel hollow or imposed. When someone is told what to believe without experiencing why it matters, the belief may be accepted on the surface but never truly rooted. Caught belief, on the other hand, grows from personal discovery. It's chosen, not assigned, and because it's chosen, it endures. The way you carry your belief communicates more than any explanation. Your tone, your consistency under pressure, and your willingness to live with the consequences of your convictions all send signals. People notice whether your belief holds steady in easy times and in difficult ones. And that steadiness is often what convinces them it's worth exploring for themselves. Belief is also passed through story and shared experience. When people join you in moments where your belief is tested or proven, they participate in its reality. They don't just hear about it, they feel it alongside you. That shared emotional experience makes the belief tangible in a way no amount of explanation could. Catching a belief happens in the spaces between words. It's in the way someone treats others, the way they approach challenges, and the way they remain grounded in uncertainty. In those quiet demonstrations, people encounter something they can't help but carry with them, and slowly it becomes their own. Starting with shared ground is about building a bridge before you try to cross it. Too often, conversations begin with differences, with the points of disagreement laid out like obstacles. This instantly triggers defensiveness and makes connection harder. Shared ground creates a sense of safety, a reminder that despite differences, there is something familiar, something mutually valued, something that already connects you. Shared ground changes the emotional climate of a conversation. When people feel understood in an area that matters to them, they lower their guard. They begin to see you not as an opponent to out-argue, but as a partner exploring possibilities. This shift in perception opens space for more honest dialogue and less resistance. It doesn't have to be a major commonality to be meaningful. Even small points of agreement, a shared goal, a similar challenge, a mutual respect for certain principles, can form a starting point. These touch points create the foundation upon which deeper and potentially more difficult conversations can rest. When you start with shared ground, you also communicate humility. You're not charging into the interaction assuming your perspective is the only valid one. Instead, you're acknowledging that the other person's reality holds truths worth respecting. That humility is magnetic. People are far more likely to engage with someone who values their perspective than with someone who dismisses it. Shared ground also reinforces a sense of belonging. Human beings are wired to connect, and finding points of agreement activates that wiring. It reassures both sides that you're on the same team in at least some way, and that reassurance can create the emotional stability necessary to explore areas of disagreement without hostility. It's important to listen before you look for alignment. By listening deeply, you uncover values and priorities the other person may not even realize they've expressed. These hidden alignments can be more powerful than the obvious ones because they come from a place of genuine discovery rather than forced consensus. Shared ground isn't about avoiding differences. It's about creating a foundation strong enough to support them. The stronger that base of mutual understanding, the more resilient the relationship will be when disagreements arise. Without that base, even small conflicts can fracture trust and communication. When you approach someone on shared ground, you invite them into a space where curiosity can thrive. The conversation shifts from how do I win this to how can we build something from here? And in that space, transformation is far more likely to take root. Modeling the change you want means embodying the very behavior, attitude, or standard you hope to see in others. It shifts the focus from instructing to demonstrating, from telling people what should happen to showing them what it looks like in action. This approach removes the distance between your words and your actions, making the message tangible and credible. When you model change, you create a living example that others can reference. People are far more likely to follow a path they've seen walked successfully than one they've only been told about. Your behavior becomes the blueprint, showing them not just the destination, but also the steps along the way. Leading by example requires consistency. One moment of contradiction can undermine months of effort because people watch actions more closely than they listen to words. Consistency builds trust, and trust gives your example the weight it needs to inspire. Modeling also removes the perception of hypocrisy. It's easy to dismiss advice from someone who doesn't follow it themselves. But when you align your actions with your message, you remove that barrier. Your credibility becomes harder to question because you're living proof that your principles are possible. Being the example often means accepting that your influence will be more subtle and slower to take root. It's not about instant results, but about creating an environment where change feels natural because it's already present. People absorb your behavior over time. Sometimes, without realizing, they've started to adopt it. This approach requires patience and resilience, especially when others are slow to follow. It's tempting to revert to convincing or pressuring, but lasting change rarely comes from force. By staying committed to modeling the change, you demonstrate not just the what's, but the perseverance required for it to last. Your example can also act as a mirror. When others see you consistently living out certain values, it can prompt them to reflect on their own behavior. That reflection can spark curiosity, and curiosity is often the first step toward voluntary change. Modeling the change you want turns influence into something organic. Rather than pulling people toward a vision, you create a reality so compelling that they begin moving toward it on their own. Inviting, instead of instructing, changes the tone of influence. Instruction implies hierarchy. One person knows and the other obeys. Invitation implies partnership. Both are exploring together. This shift transforms the interaction from a command into an opportunity, from something imposed to something chosen. An invitation respects autonomy. People are more likely to engage fully when they feel their choice matters. When you invite someone, you give them space to decide for themselves, and that decision often leads to deeper commitment because it's internally motivated rather than externally demanded. Instructing can trigger resistance, even when the instruction is logical or beneficial. Human beings instinctively protect their freedom, and a directive can feel like a threat to that freedom. An invitation bypasses this defense, framing the change as an option to explore rather than a rule to follow. Inviting also creates curiosity. When you frame something as an open door instead of a fixed path, you invite people to step inside and see what's there. That sense of discovery can be far more powerful than compliance because it activates intrinsic motivation, the desire to learn and grow for one's own reasons. This approach requires patience because invitations don't guarantee immediate action. Some people may decline at first, only to return later when they feel ready. The value lies in keeping the door open, showing that the opportunity remains available without pressure or judgment. An invitation is most powerful when it's paired with example. If you invite someone to consider a new idea and they see you already living it out, the authenticity reinforces the offer. It shows them the invitation isn't just words, it's grounded in lived experience. Inviting also communicates trust. You're signaling that you believe in the other person's ability to make their own decision. That trust can be empowering, motivating them to rise to the occasion simply because you believe they can. When you invite instead of instruct, you create a dynamic where change feels voluntary and personal. This fosters ownership, and ownership leads to action that is not just compliant, but committed. Playing the long game of trust means resisting the urge for immediate results and instead investing in consistent, authentic connection over time. Trust is not built in a single conversation or through one grand gesture. It's formed through repeated moments where reliability, honesty, and care are proven again and again. Short-term persuasion tactics can produce quick wins, but they rarely sustain loyalty. People may agree with you in the moment out of convenience, but without trust, that agreement is fragile. The long game focuses on building something deeper, where people stay engaged because they believe in you, not because they feel pressured. Trust grows in the small, often unnoticed interactions. Abundant. It's in showing up when you said you would, following through on promises, and being transparent even when the truth is inconvenient. Over time, these moments accumulate into a foundation strong enough to withstand disagreements or challenges. The long game